The wind howled through the pines as Emma clutched her daughter's small hand. The mountain cabin stood weathered but sturdy against the gathering storm, much like the boy who lived there. At 17, Elijah had survived alone for years in these mountains, his eyes holding the wisdom of someone far beyond his years. Emma knew her time was running out. The cancer had spread too far, too fast. This remote village offered no hospitals, only the certainty that her daughter would soon be motherless in this unforgiving wilderness. "Please," Emma whispered, her trembling hand extending a worn photograph. "She has no one else." Elijah studied the frail woman, then looked at the wide-eyed girl hiding behind her mother's legs. Could a solitary mountain boy possibly become family to this frightened child? What secrets lay hidden in the photograph that would forever change their lives? Dawn broke over the mountains as Elijah rose from his bed, the familiar ache in his shoulders a testament to yesterday's hunt. The cabin creaked with the morning wind, a sound that had been his only consistent companion for 5 years now. At 17, his hands were already calloused and weathered like a man twice his age. He moved silently through his morning ritual, stoking the embers in the stone fireplace, setting water to boil, checking his snares through the window. On the crude shelf above his workbench sat a collection of wooden figures, bears, wolves, eagles, each carved with surprising delicacy considering the rough hands that created them. Elijah picked up his most recent creation, a half-finished fox, and turned it in the morning light. His grandfather had taught him carving to keep his hands busy during long winter nights. "Idle hands invite dark thoughts," the old man would say, his own knife flicking away wood shavings with practiced ease. Grandfather had been gone for 5 years now. The consumption took him slowly, then all at once during a bitter February storm. At 12, Elijah had buried him alone, digging through half-frozen ground until his hands bled. The village at the base of the mountain had offered to take him in, but something in him had hardened that winter night. The mountain was his home, the old cabin his inheritance. He pulled on his worn leather boots and stepped outside into the brisk mountain air. The forest stretched before him, a familiar wilderness that had both tested and sustained him. The villagers called him the Mountain Ghost, a boy who appeared briefly to trade furs and game before vanishing back into the trees. Some whispered he was wild, dangerous even. Others pitied the orphan who spoke fewer words each year. They weren't entirely wrong. Solitude had shaped him like water-shaped stone, gradually, persistently, until the rough edges of grief had been smoothed into quiet resilience. Elijah checked his snares. 2 rabbits would make a good stew. He gutted them efficiently, his movements automatic after years of practice. His grandfather's voice still guided his hands. "Respect what feeds you, boy. Nothing dies without purpose on this mountain." By midday, he had repaired a section of the cabin roof, smoked the remaining deer meat from yesterday's hunt, and gathered firewood for the coming night. The rhythm of survival left little room for loneliness, though sometimes during the deep quiet of night, he would look at the wooden figures and remember his grandfather's stories of the outside world. The afternoon brought storm clouds gathering over the distant peaks. Elijah surveyed his food stores, smoked meat, preserved berries, dried mushrooms and roots. Enough to last through any weather. Self-reliance wasn't just a skill. It was his religion. Needing others meant risking loss, and he'd had enough of that for one lifetime. As the first raindrops began to fall, Elijah sat at his workbench and picked up his carving knife. The fox took shape beneath his careful attention, tiny details emerging from the wood grain. In these moments, something softer emerged in him, an artistry at odds with the hardened young man who tracked deer through snow and fought off wolves in winter. The unexpected knock came just as darkness fell, barely audible above the storm's fury. Visitors were rare enough in fair weather. In a storm like this, they were unheard of. Elijah set down his carving and reached for his rifle, a precaution honed by mountain wisdom. He opened the door to find a woman, soaked to the bone, clutching a small child to her chest. The woman's face was gaunt, her eyes sunken with exhaustion, and something else Elijah recognized immediately, the look of approaching death. He'd seen it in his grandfather's face, in the eyes of wounded animals he'd mercifully dispatched. "Please," she gasped, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "We've nowhere else to go." Elijah hesitated. The isolation he'd built around himself suddenly felt tangible, like a wall he couldn't see past. His instinct was to turn them away. The mountain was no place for strangers, especially a sickly woman and child. His cabin barely accommodated him alone, yet something in the child's frightened eyes pulled at a memory. Himself. Years ago, watching his grandfather's labored breathing, knowing he would soon face the wilderness alone. "Come in," he said finally, stepping aside. "The storm's getting worse." As they crossed his threshold, Elijah felt a strange certainty that his carefully constructed solitude had just ended, whether he was ready or not. Emma sat by the cabin window, her thin fingers tracing patterns in the leather-bound journal on her lap. Between its pages, pressed wildflowers from the mountain meadows created a fragile herbarium: columbine for courage, arnica for healing, and yarrow for protection. The irony wasn't lost on her that these plants, which had once given her hope of a cure, now served only as beautiful bookmarks in her final chapter. "Your tea," Elijah said, placing a steaming cup beside her. In the 3 days since their arrival, his words remained few, but his watchful eyes missed nothing. "Thank you," Emma whispered, her voice threadbare. "The yarrow helps with the pain." Across the room, Lily slept on a makeshift bed of furs and blankets, her small chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. At 6 years old, she understood her mother was sick, but couldn't grasp the permanence of what was coming. "She sleeps deeper here," Emma noted. In the village, every cough would wake her. Elijah nodded, his gaze shifting between mother and daughter. "Why me?" he finally asked, the question that had burned in him since their arrival. Emma opened her journal to a marked page. "Because you know survival," she said simply. "And because of this." She handed him a folded paper from between the pages, a newspaper clipping about a mountain boy who had buried his grandfather and refused to leave his home. 3 years ago, I read this in a doctor's waiting room. The doctor had just told me my cancer might respond to treatment in the city. We went there, sold everything for those treatments." Emma's bitter laugh dissolved into a cough. "All it bought me was time. When we returned to the village last month and I heard you were still here, I knew." "Knew what?" Elijah asked, uncomfortable with her certainty, "that you would understand what it means to be left behind. That you would know how to teach her to survive." The following days settled into a strange rhythm. Mornings, when Emma's strength was greatest, she would sit with Elijah, explaining Lily's routines, her fears, her favorite stories. Afternoons, while Emma rested, Lily would follow Elijah around the cabin, watching his work with solemn curiosity. "She's like a shadow," he complained once. Setting down his axe after chopping kindling, Emma smiled weakly from her bed. "She's studying you, learning, she does that." As Emma grew weaker, her journal entries became more urgent. She wrote when pain kept her awake, documenting everything she could think of about raising Lily, from treating fevers with elderberry tea to calming nightmares with stories about brave rabbits outsmarting wolves. The village doctor hiked up once, carrying what few medicines could ease her passage. Elijah watched from the doorway as the old man examined Emma, their hushed conversation ending with her resigned nod. "Days," the doctor told Elijah privately before departing. "Make her comfortable." That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Emma beckoned Elijah closer to her bedside. "There's money," she whispered, pointing weakly to a hidden pocket in her traveling bag. "Enough for supplies through winter, maybe school next year." Panic flashed across Elijah's face. "School? I never agreed to—" "You promised to keep her," Emma interrupted, sudden strength in her voice. "As family. That means her future too." Her hand clutched his wrist with surprising force. Promise me she'll have chances we didn't. Elijah's jaw tightened. Family. The word felt foreign, dangerous even. But he nodded, unable to deny a dying woman's plea. Emma's relief was visible. She removed a locket from around her neck and pressed it into his palm. Give this to her when she's older. There's a letter inside, and things she should know when she's ready. Later, as moonlight spilled through the cabin window, Emma called for pen and paper. Her handwriting, once flowing and elegant, now trembled across the page as she wrote her final wishes. A makeshift will naming Elijah as Lily's guardian. With the village doctor as witness, it would stand legally. It's not just because you can teach her survival, Emma confessed as he took the document. It's because when you look at her, I see concern, not pity. She'll need that strength. Elijah carefully folded the paper. I don't know if I can be what she needs. Emma's tired smile held a wisdom beyond her 32 years. None of us do. We just try and hope it's enough. The morning light filtered through the cabin windows as Elijah awkwardly placed a bowl of porridge before Lily. The child stared at it without moving, her small fingers clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit, its once white fur now grey with age and love. You need to eat, Elijah said, his voice gruff from disuse. He'd grown accustomed to days of silence, speaking only to himself or occasionally to the woodland creatures he hunted. Speaking to a child felt like using a language he'd forgotten. Lily's eyes darted toward her mother, who lay resting near the fireplace. Emma nodded encouragingly, though the effort seemed to drain what little color remained in her face. Rabbit doesn't like porridge, Lily whispered. The first words she'd spoken directly to Elijah, he stared at her completely at a loss. His grandfather had never prepared him for conversations about the dietary preferences of stuffed toys. Emma's weak voice saved him. Perhaps Rabbit would like honey with it. Elijah reached for the precious jar of honey he'd traded for last autumn, a luxury he rarely allowed himself, saved for the darkest winter days when sweetness seemed a distant memory. He added a small dollop to the porridge and slid it back toward Lily. Try now, he said, then added awkwardly, Please. Lily studied his face with the intense scrutiny only children can master before cautiously taking a spoonful. Elijah found himself inexplicably relieved when she continued eating. Later, while Emma slept, he attempted to repair a tear in his hunting jacket. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, whispering secrets to her rabbit. Occasionally, she would glance up at him, quickly looking away when their eyes met. What's his name? Elijah finally asked, nodding toward the stuffed animal. Just Rabbit, Lily replied. He keeps bad dreams away, Elijah nodded solemnly. Important job. A tentative smile flickered across her face before disappearing. Progress, perhaps. That evening, as Elijah prepared a stew from the day's hunting, Emma called him to her bedside. Her voice was fainter than ever, like autumn leaves crumbling underfoot. You're doing well with her, she whispered. Elijah shook his head. I don't know how to talk to children. Few do, Emma smiled weakly. Even parents. Just listen more than you speak. Her eyes drifted to where Lily played with pine cones by the hearth. She'll need routine. Breakfast at sunrise. Bedtime with a story. Rabbit must always be accounted for. What if... Elijah started, then stopped, unwilling to voice his fears of inadequacy. Emma reached for his calloused hand. You'll learn. As I did. The next morning brought a rare moment of lucidity for Emma. Sitting propped against pillows, she beckoned Lily to her side, then surprised Elijah by calling him over too. Lily needs to learn about the mountain, she said. Her breath labored between words. What's safe? What isn't? Elijah nodded hesitantly. There's a meadow near the eastern stream. Safe for gathering. No predators. Emma's eyes held his. Show her today. While I rest. It was as much a command as a request, an opportunity for them to begin building trust outside her watchful gaze. The walk to the meadow was silent. Lily trailed behind him, Rabbit dangling from one hand. Twice, Elijah had to slow his pace, forgetting how small her steps were compared to his. In the meadow, yellow wildflowers bobbed in the gentle breeze. Elijah pointed to different plants, naming them as his grandfather had taught him. Lily listened without comment, her free hand occasionally reaching to touch a leaf or petal. When a red-tailed hawk soared overhead, Lily gasped and pressed against Elijah's leg in momentary fear. The unfamiliar weight of her small body against him froze him in place. "Just a hawk," he explained awkwardly. "Hunting mice, not little girls. Or rabbits?" she asked, holding her toy protectively. "No," Elijah assured her, surprising himself with the gentle tone that emerged. "Your rabbit is safe with us." Walking back to the cabin, Lily stumbled over a root. Without thinking, Elijah caught her hand to steady her. She didn't pull away, and they completed the journey, with her tiny fingers wrapped around his index finger. A tenuous connection, fragile as spider silk but present nonetheless. That night, as Elijah tucked a blanket around her sleeping form, he noticed Rabbit had fallen to the floor. He carefully placed the toy back in her arms, watching as she instinctively hugged it close. Something unfamiliar tightened in his chest. Not quite fear, not quite hope, but something between the two. The change came suddenly, a sharp decline that transformed Emma overnight. Her breathing grew shallow, her skin taking on the greyish pallor that Elijah recognized all too well. He'd seen it in his grandfather's face during those final days. "We need the doctor," he told her, already reaching for his coat. Emma weakly grasped his wrist. "No time," she whispered. "Paper, in my bag." Elijah retrieved a folded document from her travel sack. The handwriting was shaky but legible, a handwritten will naming him as Lily's guardian, with specific instructions for her care. He read it twice, the weight of responsibility pressing heavier with each word. "I can't sign this," he said, his voice tight with panic. "I'm 17. The authorities—" "The mountain is its own authority," Emma interrupted, her voice surprisingly firm despite her weakening body. "Village council will honor it. Doctor witnessed it yesterday." Lily sat nearby, arranging pine cones in careful patterns, mercifully oblivious to the gravity of the conversation. Her stuffed rabbit watched the proceedings from its perch on her lap, button eyes reflecting the firelight. "She has no other family?" Elijah asked. Emma's eyes drifted to the worn photograph on the table, the one with the partially torn face. "None that can be trusted with her," she said simply. A coughing spell overtook her, and when it passed, she motioned Elijah closer. "There's something you need to know about her father," she began. Her voice barely audible, Elijah leaned in as Emma revealed the truth about a man who'd abandoned them when Lily was an infant, about threats made when drunk, about the real reason they'd moved to this remote mountain village. Elijah's jaw tightened with each whispered confession. "If he ever comes looking—" Emma's fingers dug into Elijah's arm with surprising strength. "He won't find her," Elijah promised, the words emerging with a conviction that surprised him. Relief softened Emma's face. "The will ensures he has no claim. The village magistrate has a copy." By midday, Emma's breathing had grown so labored that Elijah sent Lily outside to gather kindling, wanting to spare her the sight of her mother's increasing distress. The moment the door closed, Emma gestured urgently for him to come closer. "Promise me," she gasped, each word clearly costing her precious energy. "Promise you'll raise her as family." "Not as obligation." "As family." Elijah felt a cold wave of panic. Family! The concept seemed foreign after years of solitude. He knew how to survive, how to hunt and build and endure, but family, that was a language he'd nearly forgotten. "I don't know if I can," he admitted. Emma's hand found his. "Family isn't something you know, it's something you do. Every day." Her eyes bright with fever held his. "Promise me." Before he could respond, a knock at the door announced the village doctor's arrival. The elderly man took one look at Emma, and his expression turned grave. He examined her quietly, then pulled Elijah aside. "Tonight, perhaps tomorrow morning," he said softly. "No more than that. The pain medicine will help." As the doctor administered the tincture that would ease her final hours, Elijah stepped outside, lungs burning with the need for fresh air. Lily was nearby, her small arms full of twigs. her face turned up toward a chickadee singing in the pine above. Looking at her, this small, vulnerable person who would soon be completely dependent on him, Elijah felt woefully unprepared. What did he know of raising a child? Of comforting nightmares or tending fevers or answering endless questions? Yet when Lily saw him watching and offered a hesitant smile, the first she'd given him freely, something shifted in his chest. An unfamiliar warmth spread beneath his ribs, melting a corner of the ice he'd carefully maintained around his heart since his grandfather's death. That evening, as Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, Elijah sat beside her bed and finally spoke the words she needed to hear. "I promise," he said quietly, taking her frail hand in his. "I'll raise her as family." A single tear slipped down Emma's cheek as she nodded. "Then I can go in peace," she whispered. Outside the cabin window, the first star of evening appeared in the darkening sky. Inside, a reluctant guardian began the process of becoming something he never expected to be, a father. Emma slipped away quietly in the pre-dawn hours, her last breath a gentle sigh that barely disturbed the cabin's stillness. Elijah had been awake, tending the fire, when he noticed the change, the subtle shift in the room when her labored breathing simply ceased. He sat motionless beside her bed for a long while, watching as the first pale light of morning gradually revealed her peaceful face. Lily still slept. Curled beneath furs in the corner, Rabbit clutched against her chest. Elijah envied her those final moments of innocence, the last dream time before waking to a world forever changed. He had been 12 when his grandfather died, old enough to understand death's finality. Lily, at 6, might not fully comprehend what had happened, what it meant that her mother would never hold her again, never brush her hair or tell her stories. When Lily finally stirred, blinking sleepily in the morning light, Elijah knelt beside her makeshift bed. "Your mother's journey ended in the night," he said softly, using the mountain terminology his grandfather had taught him about death. "Her spirit has gone to join the stars, but her love stays with you always." Lily stared at him, uncomprehending, then looked past him to the still form on the bed. "Is Mama sleeping?" "No," Elijah said gently. "She's not sleeping. Her body stopped working, and she can't come back. But mountain people believe that our spirits live forever in the sky." He pointed upward. "Tonight, there will be a new star watching over you." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she remained silent, clutching Rabbit tighter against her chest. The stillness in her grief unsettled Elijah more than screams would have. Children should cry, should rage against such injustice. This quiet acceptance felt wrong, somehow too adult for her small shoulders. Before Lily fully woke, Emma had already prepared one final gift. Beside her bed lay a silver locket, carefully polished despite its obvious age. Inside, Elijah discovered a lock of Emma's chestnut hair, tied with thread and nestled beside a tiny folded note. He didn't read the message. That was for Lily alone, when she was older. The village elder arrived by midday, having been alerted by the doctor of Emma's impending passing. The old man's weathered face showed no surprise at finding the mother already gone, only a deep compassion as he helped Elijah prepare for mountain burial rites. "The child should participate," the elder advised quietly, watching as Lily sat silent by the window. "It helps make the farewell real." Together they wrapped Emma's body in her best blanket, placing wildflowers from her journal between the folds. Lily watched solemnly, then approached with Rabbit extended in her small hands. "For Mama," she whispered, "so she won't be lonely." Elijah knelt before her. "Your mother would want Rabbit to stay with you," he explained gently. "But perhaps we could find something else of yours to send with her." After a moment's thought, Lily removed the blue ribbon from her hair, one of the few pretty things she owned. With reverent care, she placed it between her mother's folded hands before stepping back. They buried Emma on the eastern slope, where morning sun would warm the ground. The elder spoke traditional mountain words of passage, while Elijah and Lily placed stones to mark the grave. When the final stone was set, Lily placed her hand against it. "Goodbye, Mama," she whispered, her first tears finally spilling over. That night, as darkness fell, Elijah found himself facing the first of many challenges, bedtime without Emma. Lily stood beside her sleeping furs, clearly exhausted but unable to settle. "Mama always sings," she said, her voice small in the cabin's silence. Panic fluttered in Elijah's chest. He knew no lullabies, had never sung to another soul. Yet the lost look in Lily's eyes compelled him to try, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. He hummed a mountain melody his grandfather had often whistled while working, a tune about eagles soaring high above the peaks. As Lily's eyes grew heavy, Elijah gently placed the silver locket around her neck. "Your mother wanted you to have this," he explained. "A piece of her to keep close, always." Lily touched the locket with wondering fingers before slipping into sleep, her grief-exhausted body finally surrendering to rest. Elijah moved his sleeping furs to the floor outside her corner that night. Not close enough to intrude, but near enough that she would see him first upon waking. As moonlight streamed through the cabin window, he lay awake, the enormity of his promise pressing down like a physical weight. He was no longer just a solitary mountain survivor. He was family now, the only family Lily had left in the world. The scream pierced the night, jolting Elijah from sleep. He scrambled to his feet, disoriented, before remembering Lily. The child's nightmare cries had become a nightly occurrence in the week since Emma's passing. "It's all right," he said, kneeling beside her sleeping furs. "You're safe." Lily's eyes flew open, wild with terror, before focusing on his face. "Mama was calling me," she whispered. "From inside the mountain." Elijah awkwardly patted her shoulder, wishing he possessed some innate knowledge of how to comfort a grieving child. "Just a dream," he said. "Try to sleep again." But sleep remained elusive for them both. Elijah settled against the wall outside her corner, maintaining his nightly vigil until her breathing deepened once more. Then, as every night this week, he slipped outside to split wood by moonlight, the physical exertion the only remedy he knew for the knot of anxiety in his chest. Morning brought a break in routine. Lily, usually silent and withdrawn at breakfast, studied the porridge he placed before her with obvious displeasure. "It's lumpy," she stated flatly. "It's food," Elijah countered. Surprised by her sudden critique, Mama made it smooth. "With berries sometimes," Elijah sighed, running a hand through his hair. Emma had made everything seem effortless. Cooking, cleaning, caring for Lily. His attempts felt clumsy by comparison. Yesterday's rabbit stew had been too gamey. The day before's bread nearly inedible. "I'll try again tomorrow," he conceded. After breakfast, Elijah spread a piece of birch bark on the table and began sketching with a charcoal stick. Lily watched curiously as mountains, trees, and the cabin took shape. "This," he explained, tracing a circle around the cabin, "is safe area. You can play here without asking." He drew another circle encompassing the nearby spring. "Water is here. Never go alone." Finally, he marked the distant tree line with heavy strokes. "Beyond these pines, never. Bears, wolves, steep drops. Understand?" Lily nodded solemnly, her finger tracing the map's boundaries. It wasn't much, the territory of childhood reduced to a few hundred yards, but the mountain forgave no mistakes. The map joined Emma's will and journal in the wooden box beside Elijah's bed. Having a child meant having rules, and rules needed remembering. Midday found them at the creek, Elijah teaching Lily to identify tracks in the mud: deer, raccoon, fox. She absorbed the knowledge silently, her only response an occasional nod. "Does your throat hurt?" he asked finally, unnerved by her continued muteness. Lily shook her head, but offered nothing more. Her silence was becoming its own presence in the cabin, a third companion that followed them through the days. The afternoon brought the first real crisis. Elijah had stepped inside to fetch water when he realized Lily was no longer sitting on the stump where he'd left her. Panic surged through him as he scanned the clearing. "Lily!" His voice echoed against the mountainside, receiving no answer. He found her tracks leading toward the creek, then continuing dangerously close to the deeper woods. His heart hammered as he followed the small footprints. Cursing himself for taking his eyes off her even briefly, The faint sound of humming finally led him to a small meadow just beyond his designated safe area. Lily knelt among wildflowers, gathering purple blooms in her small hands. Completely oblivious to his terror. "What are you doing?" he demanded, harsher than intended. "These woods aren't safe." Lily flinched at his tone, clutching her flowers protectively. "For Mama," she whispered. "To make her grave pretty." The anger drained from Elijah as quickly as it had come. Of course she would want to tend her mother's resting place. Emma had been gone only 7 days, a lifetime to a child, yet barely a moment. "Next time, ask first," he said, gentling his voice. "I'll come with you." That evening, after placing Lily's flowers on the grave, they returned to the cabin in growing darkness. Elijah lit the lamps and set about preparing a simple dinner of dried venison and the season's first spring greens. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire. "Will you tell me about the stars?" Lily asked suddenly, her small voice startling in the quiet cabin. "Which one is Mama?" The unexpected question caught Elijah off guard. He moved to the window, motioning for Lily to join him. Together they gazed at the night sky, a velvet expanse scattered with silver light. "The brightest new one," he said finally, pointing to a twinkling star directly overhead. "Right there, watching over you." It wasn't true. Of course, stars were ancient, unchanging, but the small lie seemed kind in a world that had been anything but kind to this child. That night, for the first time since Emma's passing, Lily slept without nightmares. The first frost came early that year, painting the ground with delicate silver patterns that crunched under Elijah's boots as he inspected his garden. The mountain always gave fair warning before winter's full assault, and he'd learned to read its signs: migrating birds flying in tighter formations, squirrels frantically gathering final stores, the distinct scent of snow on the wind weeks before the first flakes fell. "Winter comes early this year," he told Lily, as they harvested the last of the root vegetables. "We need to prepare." She nodded solemnly, her small hands carefully placing potatoes in the woven basket. 2 months had passed since Emma's death, and though Lily rarely spoke, she followed Elijah's instructions with quiet attention. "What happens in winter?" she asked, surprising him with the question. Elijah considered how to explain mountain winters to a child who had only known village life. "Snow deeper than you are tall," he began. "Days so cold your breath freezes. Nights when the stars seem close enough to touch." He paused, noting her widening eyes. "But inside, we'll be warm, safe." The following days took on new urgency. Elijah doubled his hunting efforts, bringing home rabbits, a young deer, and even a wild turkey. Lily watched with solemn curiosity as he showed her how to smoke meat on racks above carefully tended fires, explaining how preservation would carry them through months when fresh game grew scarce. "Your job is berries," he told her, demonstrating how to sort the last of the season's blueberries and blackberries for drying. Her small fingers worked with surprising dexterity, separating overripe from perfect with careful attention. As they worked side by side in companionable silence, Elijah found himself studying her worn clothing with growing concern. Her dress, already too thin when they'd arrived, had been mended multiple times. Her shoes, little more than cloth slippers, would never withstand snow. "We need to visit the village," he decided aloud. Lily's head snapped up, alarm clear in her eyes. "I don't want to leave the mountain." "Not to stay," Elijah assured her. "To trade, for winter things." The journey to the village took most of the morning, Lily's small legs slowing their usual pace. Elijah carried a pack laden with furs and smoked meat, valuable currency in the barter economy of mountain communities. As they descended into the valley, he felt Lily's hand slip into his, a rare gesture of trust that tightened something in his chest. The village was little more than a cluster of cabins and a single trading post, but to a child who had only known Their isolated mountainside for months, it clearly felt overwhelming. Lily pressed against Elijah's leg as curious eyes turned their way. "Mountain ghost brings a little ghost now," he overheard one woman whisper to another. Inside the trading post, Elijah spread his offerings before the shopkeeper. Prime furs, specialty smoked meats and medicinal herbs he'd gathered, using Emma's journal as guide. The man nodded appreciatively. "Good haul," he acknowledged. "What do you need?" Elijah gestured toward Lily. "Winter gear, for her." The shopkeeper's wife appeared from the back room, her eyes softening at the sight of the small girl. "Emma's child," she said quietly. "We heard." She knelt before Lily. "Let's find you proper boots, shall we?" While the woman helped Lily try on sturdy leather boots lined with rabbit fur, Elijah selected other necessities: thick woolen stockings, a heavy coat, mittens, and a knitted cap. The cost far exceeded his usual trading, requiring nearly everything he'd brought. "Add these," the shopkeeper's wife said, placing a bundle of girls' dresses and undergarments on the counter. When Elijah began to protest, the cost now well beyond his means. She shook her head firmly. "No charge for these. Emma was kind to my mother in her final days. We pay our debts." The walk home felt lighter despite their packs. Lily stomped in her new boots, watching with delight as they left clear prints in the muddy path. Halfway up the mountain, they encountered the season's first snowflakes, just a few dancing specks that melted upon landing. Lily tilted her face skyward, eyes wide with wonder. "It's like stars falling," she whispered. That night, as they sat by the fire, Elijah taught Lily to darn holes in her old stockings. "Waste nothing on the mountain," he explained, demonstrating how to pull the needle through the worn fabric. "Everything can be useful again." She nodded, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration as she mimicked his movements. The small boots sat drying by the fire, already marked with mud from their journey, but sturdy enough to carry her through the coming winter. "Thank you," she said suddenly, her voice so quiet he nearly missed it. "For the boots." "You're family now," Elijah replied simply. "Family keeps each other warm." It was the first time he'd spoken the word aloud since making his promise to Emma. Winter settled over the mountain like a heavy blanket, transforming their world into a landscape of white silence. Inside the cabin, life fell into simple rhythms: stoking the fire before dawn, melting snow for water, preparing meals from their carefully preserved stores. Outside, the snow piled higher with each passing week, sometimes trapping them indoors for days at a time. For Elijah, the isolation was familiar. Winter had always been a time of turning inward. But for Lily, the confinement seemed to deepen her silence. Days would pass with barely a word from her, though her eyes followed Elijah constantly, watching as he carved new wooden figures or repaired tools by firelight. On a rare, clear morning, Elijah dug a path from their door through snow nearly as tall as Lily. "Fresh air day," he announced, helping her into her coat and boots. They ventured only as far as the great pine near the cabin. But Lily's eyes widened at the transformed landscape, familiar places made strange under Winter's artistic hand. While Elijah checked his nearest snares, Lily discovered a piece of birch bark that had fallen atop the snow. She carried it inside later, her prize held carefully between mittened hands. That evening, while Elijah prepared their dinner, Lily sat cross-legged by the fire, using a charred stick from the hearth to make marks on the smooth inner surface of the bark. Occasionally, she would glance up at him, then return to her work with solemn concentration. "What are you making?" he finally asked, curiosity overcoming his usual reservation. Lily held up the bark without speaking. On its surface, 3 crude figures stood beneath the night sky, a tall one, a small one, and above them a star larger and brighter than the rest. "That's you," she whispered, pointing to the tall figure. "That's me." Her finger moved to the smaller one. "And that's Mama." Something tightened in Elijah's chest. It was the first time she had mentioned her mother without being prompted since the early days of grief. More surprising was her inclusion of him in this family portrait of sorts. "It's very good," he said, unsure what else to offer. Lily set the drawing carefully on the shelf beside his wooden carvings, then returned to her place by the fire. The quiet between them stretched comfortably, broken only by the crackling flames and the occasional howl of wind outside. "Will we always live here?" she asked suddenly. "Just us?" The question caught Elijah off guard. "This is our home," he said simply. "We're safe here, but we're alone. We have each other," he replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "We're family." Lily considered this, her small face serious in the firelight. "What happened to your family? Before me?" Elijah's hands stilled on the wooden spoon he'd been carving. No one had asked him about his past in years. There had been no one to ask. The village respected his privacy, and he'd preferred it that way. "My parents died when I was very young," he said finally. "Fever took them both in one winter. My grandfather raised me here, taught me everything about the mountain." He gestured around the cabin. "He built this place with his own hands." "Did he go to the stars too?" Elijah nodded. 5 winters ago. I was 12 then." "And you were alone until now?" "Yes." Lily absorbed this information with the careful attention she gave to all his lessons about tracking or identifying safe plants. "That's a long time to be alone," she said finally. "The mountain keeps you company," Elijah said, "if you know how to listen." That night, as Elijah tucked the furs around her small form, Lily surprised him again. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being my family now." The words hung in the quiet cabin, simple yet profound. Before he could respond, she had already drifted to sleep, her breathing deep and even. The following morning brought the worst blizzard of the season. Wind howled around the cabin corners, while snow fell so thick it seemed to erase the world beyond their windows. Elijah stoked the fire higher than usual, grateful for their ample wood supply. "Storm Voice is angry today," Lily observed, pressing her face against the frosted glass. Elijah looked up from the trap he was repairing. "Storm Voice? The mountain," she explained, as though it should be obvious. "It talks different in winter. Mama never heard it, but I do." "What does it say?" Lily tilted her head, listening to the wind's mournful cry. "It's singing sad songs today." Elijah felt a strange chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. His grandfather had spoken similarly of the mountain having moods and voices, knowledge he'd attributed to old superstitions. Hearing those same thoughts from Lily was unsettling, yet strangely fitting. "The mountain chose you," his grandfather had told him once. Now he wondered if perhaps it had chosen Lily too. As the day progressed, the storm's fury only intensified. When a particularly violent gust rattled the cabin walls, Lily abandoned her usual corner to sit closer to Elijah by the fire. "Will we be safe?" she asked, her voice small against the storm's rage. "Always," he promised. "This cabin has weathered 100 such storms." She nodded, seemingly satisfied, then leaned slightly against his arm, the first time she had initiated such contact. "We're family," she said, not as a question this time, but as a statement of fact. Spring arrived with a rush of melting snow and the first tentative birdsong. The world outside their cabin transformed from white stillness to vibrant rebirth, green shoots pushing through the last patches of snow. Elijah and Lily emerged from winter's confinement like hibernating creatures, blinking in the strengthening sunlight. "Look." Elijah pointed to a robin building its nest in the eaves. First sign of true spring. Lily watched the bird with fascination, her face tilted upward. The winter had changed her. She stood taller, spoke more freely, and had developed a keen eye for the mountain's subtle rhythms. Her silence had gradually given way to questions, observations, even occasional laughter. They settled into spring routines, planting the garden, checking Elijah's traps, and gathering the first wild greens. Nearly 6 months had passed since Emma's death, and while Lily still placed wildflowers on her mother's grave, the raw grief had gentled into something quieter. The stranger arrived on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. Elijah was showing Lily how to identify deer tracks when they heard the unfamiliar sound of a vehicle laboring up the seldom-used forest road. "Inside," Elijah said immediately, his body tensing. "Go to your corner." Lily hesitated only briefly before running to the cabin. Visitors were rare, and unexpected ones rarer still. Elijah retrieved his rifle from beside the door, not to threaten, but to remind whoever approached that this was mountain territory, where caution was wisdom. The vehicle that eventually emerged from the tree line was official-looking, dark green with government markings. A woman stepped out, dressed in a crisp blouse and practical pants, a clipboard tucked under her arm. Her city shoes were already gathering mud as she picked her way toward the cabin. "Mr. Hayes," she called, consulting her paperwork. "Elijah Hayes." Elijah stepped onto the porch, rifle pointed safely downward but visible. "Who's asking?" "Margaret Wilkins, Child Protective Services." She held up an identification badge. "I'm here about Lily Harmon." I settled in Elijah's stomach. "What about her?" "We received a report that a minor child is living in potentially unsuitable conditions with an unrelated young man." Her eyes scanned the cabin's rustic exterior. "I need to conduct a welfare check." "Who reported this?" "That information is confidential." She gestured to the door. "May I come in?" Elijah reluctantly stepped aside, setting his rifle by the door. Inside, Lily sat in her corner, eyes wide with apprehension. The woman smiled at her. "Hello, Lily. I'm Miss Wilkins. I've come to see how you're doing." Lily looked to Elijah, who nodded slightly. "I'm fine," she said softly. What followed was a thorough inspection of their food supplies, sleeping arrangements, water source, and heating. Miss Wilkins took copious notes, her expression revealing nothing as she methodically documented their living conditions. "Do you attend school, Lily?" she asked. Lily shook her head. "Elijah teaches me things. About the mountain. And reading, I see. More notes on the clipboard. And medical care? Has she seen a doctor since her mother's passing?" "The village doctor checks on her," Elijah said, omitting that these checks were infrequent at best. Finally, Ms. Wilkins asked to speak with Lily alone. Elijah stepped outside, his hands clenched at his sides, fear churning in his gut. Through the window, he could see the woman kneeling to Lily's height, asking questions that made the child's face grow increasingly distressed. When he was called back inside, Ms. Wilkins' expression was grave. "Mr. Hayes, I have serious concerns about this arrangement. You're barely 18 yourself, with no formal guardianship established. There's no running water, no electricity, no access to proper education or regular medical care." She straightened her papers. "I'll be recommending temporary placement for Lily while we evaluate the situation." "You mean take her away?" Elijah said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She just lost her mother. Now you want to take her from her home too?" "This isn't a suitable environment for a child," Ms. Wilkins insisted. "The foster system can provide—" "No!" Lily's shout startled them both. She ran to Elijah's side, clinging to his leg. "This is my home. Elijah is my family. Mama gave me to him." Ms. Wilkins's expression softened slightly. "Sweetie, sometimes adults think they're doing what's best, but I have a paper," Lily insisted. "Mama's paper that says I stay with Elijah." Elijah moved to the wooden box where he kept important items. "Emma made a will," he explained, retrieving the document. "The village doctor witnessed it. She named me as Lily's guardian." Miss Wilkins examined the handwritten will with a skeptical eye. "This isn't a legal guardianship. It's not filed with any court. It's mountain law," came a new voice from the doorway. The village elder stood there, his ancient frame silhouetted against the afternoon light. And in these parts, that still means something. The elder stepped into the cabin, nodding respectfully to all present. "I received word you were headed up here," he told Miss Wilkins. "Perhaps we should discuss this matter further, before any hasty decisions are made." Relief washed through Elijah as the elder began explaining mountain customs to the increasingly frustrated government worker. The reprieve might be temporary, but for now their small family remained intact. The visit from Child Protective Services left a shadow over their mountain sanctuary. Though the village elder had convinced Ms. Wilkins to postpone any decision, she had departed with a promise to return in 30 days with a formal assessment. "What will happen?" Lily asked that evening, her small face pinched with worry. Elijah stared into the fire, weighing the truth against the child's need for security. "She wants to make sure you're being raised properly," he said finally. "That you're learning what you need to know." "I am learning," Lily insisted. "About plants and animals and weather signs." "Yes," Elijah agreed. "But there's other knowledge too. Things I haven't taught you because—" He hesitated, uncomfortable with admitting his limitations. "Because I don't know them well enough myself." That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Elijah pulled out the few books he possessed, his grandfather's old hunting manual, a tattered almanac, and a Bible missing its first chapters. His own reading was functional but basic. His grandfather had taught him letters and simple words before illness made teaching impossible. Since then, Elijah had practiced occasionally, but never prioritized book learning over survival skills. Now that choice seemed short-sighted. The government woman would expect Lily to be learning reading, writing, in numbers, things that had seemed unimportant in their mountain life, but suddenly loomed as threats to their continued existence as a family. The following morning, Elijah hiked to the village with a specific purpose. The schoolteacher, Miss Porter, lived in a small cottage near the community's only church. Though barely 30, she had a reputation for kindness, mixed with no-nonsense efficiency. "I need help teaching a child to read," Elijah said after she invited him in. Surprise evident on her face at finding the mountain recluse on her doorstep. "Lily Harmon," Miss Porter nodded. "I heard she was with you." She studied him curiously. "Why come to me now?" "Government's involved," he explained briefly. "They'll take her if she's not learning properly." Understanding dawned in the teacher's eyes. She disappeared into another room, returning with a stack of worn books. "Primer first," she said, selecting a thin volume from the pile. "Then these readers when she's ready. For numbers, use these worksheets." She added several papers to the stack. "What do you want in trade?" Elijah asked, already mentally cataloguing what furs or meats he could offer. Miss Porter considered him thoughtfully. "Bring Lily down once a week," she said finally. "I'll give her proper lessons for an afternoon. You can learn alongside her if you wish." Elijah's pride bristled at the implication that his own education needed supplementing, but practicality won out. "Agreed," he said, extending his hand to seal the bargain. That evening, Elijah and Lily sat at their rough-hewn table, the primer open between them. "A is for apple," Elijah read slowly, pointing to the letter and the accompanying picture. "I know what apples are," Lily said. "We dried some for winter, but do you know the letter that starts the word?" Lily studied the strange mark, her forehead wrinkled in concentration. "A," she repeated, tracing the shape with her finger. They progressed through the book, Elijah sometimes struggling with the more complex explanations, but pressing forward determinedly. By bedtime, Lily could recognize 5 letters and write her name in shaky capitals. "Again tomorrow?" she asked as he tucked her into bed. "Every day," he promised, "until you can read anything you want." The following weeks established a new routine. Mornings were still dedicated to practical mountain skills, tracking, gathering, garden tending, but afternoons now found them bent over books, sounding out words together. Once a week, they made the journey to Miss Porter's cottage, where Lily blossomed under formal instruction. "She has a quick mind," Miss Porter told Elijah during their 3rd visit. "Picks things up faster than most students I've taught." Pride warmed Elijah's chest, surprising in its intensity. "Her mother was clever," he said, "always writing in her journal, knowing plants and their uses." "And you?" Miss Porter asked, her gaze direct. "What were you like as a student before my grandfather died?" Elijah shrugged. "Never had much schooling. He taught me letters, basic figures, enough to get by." The teacher nodded thoughtfully. "Yet you're clearly intelligent. The way you've survived alone, how quickly you're learning alongside Lily." She hesitated, then added, "It's not too late, you know. For your own education." Elijah shifted uncomfortably under her assessment. "My learning days are past." "No one's learning days are past," she countered. "Not while they're still breathing." That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep with the primer clutched in her small hands, Elijah found himself opening Emma's journal. He had avoided reading it out of respect for her privacy, but now he carefully turned the pages, struggling with some of the more complex words, but gradually making sense of her elegant script. Between pressed flowers and medicinal notes, he found entries about Lily, her first words, favorite songs, fears and joys. Emma had documented her daughter's life with loving detail, creating a map of her child's heart that Elijah now studied with the same intensity he'd once reserved for tracking game. "I'll make sure she can read this someday," he whispered to the silent cabin. All of it. It was, he realized, another kind of promise to the woman who had trusted him with her greatest treasure. The forest awakened fully as April yielded to May, unfurling bright green leaves and coaxing wildflowers from the rich earth. With the warmer weather came the spring hunting season, a critical time to replenish their stores after winter's depletion. "Today you help," Elijah told Lily as he inspected his bow and hunting knife. "Old enough now?" Lily looked up from the simple addition problems Miss Porter had assigned, her eyes widening. "Really, not just staying at camp?" Elijah nodded. The government woman would return soon, and while Lily's reading progress was impressive, he knew their case would be stronger if he could demonstrate that the child was learning traditional skills as well. More importantly, Lily needed to understand the mountain's ways if she was to truly belong here. From the wooden chest, where he kept his most valued possessions, Elijah withdrew a small object wrapped in soft deerskin. He'd worked on it during the evenings, carving and shaping by firelight while Lily slept. "Every hunter needs proper tools," he said. Presenting the bundle to her, Lily unwrapped it carefully, gasping when she revealed the small hunting knife within. Unlike his own weathered blade, hers had been crafted specifically for small hands, the handle carved from antler, polished smooth with beeswax, the blade shorter but just as sharp. "Mine," she whispered, holding it reverently. "Yours," he confirmed. "But a knife is responsibility, not toy. I'll teach you its proper uses." The morning sun had just cleared the eastern ridge when they set out, Lily's new knife secured in a simple sheath at her belt. Elijah carried his bow and larger knife. Along with a small pack containing provisions and Emma's journal, he discovered it contained useful information about edible spring plants. "First rule of hunting," Elijah said as they entered the deeper woods, "move like shadow, breathe like breeze." Lily nodded solemnly, carefully placing her feet as he'd shown her, avoiding twigs and dry leaves. For a child not yet 7, her natural stealth impressed him. She moved with an innate understanding of the forest that reminded him of his grandfather's tales about mountain children being born with wildness in their blood. "Look," Elijah whispered, kneeling beside a patch of disturbed earth. "What made these?" Lily studied the ground, her forehead creased in concentration. "Deer," she guessed. "Close. See how the tracks are smaller, more pointed?" He traced the outline. "Fawn, born this spring." They followed the tracks to a small clearing where sunlight dappled the forest floor. Lily spotted the fawn first, a tiny creature with spindly legs and white spots, curled beneath a bush while its mother grazed nearby. "So small," she breathed, wonder lighting her face. Elijah nodded, motioning for them to retreat quietly. "Too young to hunt," he explained, once they were a safe distance away. "Never take what's still growing." Throughout the morning, he showed her how to identify promising game trails, set simple snares, and distinguish between animal sounds. She absorbed each lesson eagerly, asking thoughtful questions that sometimes challenged his knowledge. "Why do deer eat these leaves, but not those?" she asked, pointing to 2 similar-looking plants. Elijah hesitated, reluctant to admit ignorance. Some plants taste bitter to them, he said finally. Your mother would know better. She understood plants in ways I don't. Lily considered this, then opened the small pouch at her waist where she carried treasured objects. From it, she withdrew a folded page from Emma's journal. Mama wrote about deer plants, she explained, carefully unfolding the paper. She said deer won't eat things that hurt their stomachs, but they can eat some things that would make people sick. Elijah stared at the neatly written notes, surprised by Lily's foresight in bringing them. You're becoming a true mountain woman, he said softly, using knowledge from those who came before. Pride straightened her small shoulders at his words. By midday they had collected several early mushrooms and set 3 rabbit snares. Elijah had spotted a wild turkey, but held his shot when Lily gasped too loudly at its magnificent plumage. He found he didn't mind the lost opportunity. Her delight at the bird's beauty somehow balanced the practical loss. They settled beside a stream for their midday meal, sharing dried venison and the first tender greens of spring, as Elijah demonstrated how to use her new knife to whittle a simple whistle from a willow branch. A sudden movement caught their attention. A fox darted from the underbrush, pursued closely by a larger predator, a coyote with hunger evident in its lean frame. The fox, clearly injured and limping, scrambled desperately across the clearing before collapsing mere yards from where they sat. Without hesitation, the coyote closed in for the kill. Lily's hand clutched Elijah's arm, her face stricken as she witnessed the harsh reality of wilderness law. We should help it, she whispered urgently. Elijah shook his head. Nature has its own rules. Coyote must eat too, but it's not fair. The fox is hurt. Fair doesn't live in these woods, Elijah said gently. Only necessary. He expected tears or argument, but Lily watched the unfolding drama with solemn acceptance. When the coyote finally dragged its prize into the forest, she turned to him with eyes that seemed older than her years. Is that why you hunt? Because it's necessary? Elijah nodded. We take only what we need, thank what we take. That's the mountain way, and that's why you're teaching me. So I'll understand necessary things. Yes, he said, because someday you'll need to know how to survive on your own. Lily's hand found his, small fingers wrapping around his calloused ones with surprising strength. Or maybe we'll always hunt together, she said. Family helps each other survive. The day began like any other, Elijah rising before dawn, Lily soon after. They tended the garden together, harvesting early summer vegetables and checking the rabbit snares. By midday, however, Elijah felt a strange heaviness in his limbs, an unusual tiredness that made even simple tasks require effort. Are you sick? Lily asked over their evening meal, studying his flushed face with concern. Just tired, he dismissed, though the food held no taste and his head had begun to pound rhythmically. Mountain people didn't acknowledge illness easily. His grandfather had taught him that sickness was merely the body demanding rest, and would pass if given proper attention. By morning, Elijah could no longer deny it. Fire seemed to course through his veins, and standing made the cabin spin alarmingly. When he attempted to rise from his sleeping furs, his legs buckled beneath him. Elijah. Lily's voice sounded distant, despite her standing right beside him. Her small hand pressed against his forehead, then quickly withdrew. You're burning. He tried to reassure her, but his thoughts scattered like leaves in autumn wind. Water, he managed to rasp, and willow bark from my pack. Lily brought the water but shook her head about the bark. Used the last when I had a toothache, she said. Her face, normally so composed, now reflected clear fear. Should I get the village doctor? The village was nearly 3 hours' walk, much of it through difficult terrain. Elijah couldn't bear the thought of Lily making that journey alone. No, he said firmly, despite his parched throat. Too far. I'll be fine with rest. But as the day progressed, his condition worsened. The fever climbed higher, bringing with it moments of confusion where past and present blurred. Sometimes he spoke to his grandfather as though the old man still sat beside the fire. Other times he called for his long-dead mother. Through it all, Lily remained a constant presence, a small, determined shadow who pressed cool cloths to his forehead and urged him to drink. On the third morning, Elijah woke briefly to clarity, alarmed to find his strength even further diminished. The cabin was silent, Lily nowhere in sight. Panic surged through him as he called her name, his voice breaking with the effort. No answer came. He struggled to rise, falling back as dizziness overwhelmed him. Had something happened to her? Or worse, had the authorities returned and taken her while he lay helpless? The thought sent him into another bout of delirium, fever dreams, in which he searched endless forests for a child who always remained just beyond reach. When awareness returned again, the quality of light suggested late afternoon. A small figure stood at the table, grinding something with focused determination. Relief flooded him at the sight of Lily safe, followed immediately by confusion about what she was doing. "Where were you?" he croaked. Lily turned, surprise and joy crossing her face. "You're awake!" She hurried to his side, her hands stained green. "I went to find medicine." "Medicine?" She nodded earnestly. "From Mama's journal, for fever and chest sickness." Only then did Elijah notice the collection of plants laid carefully on the table, leaves and roots, some of which he recognized, others unfamiliar. Beside them lay Emma's journal, open to pages marked with pressed specimens. "You went to the forest alone?" Fear and pride wrestled in his chest. "I remembered where things grow," Lily said. "And I took my knife, just like you taught me." She returned to her work, mashing herbs with a stone against the wooden cup. When the mixture satisfied her, she added water and brought it to him. "Mama wrote that this tastes terrible but works fast," she warned, as she held the cup to his lips. The bitter concoction made him grimace, but he drank obediently, moved by her determination. "How did you know what to gather?" he asked when he'd finished. Lily sat beside him, her small face serious beyond her years. "I've been reading Mama's journal with Miss Porter's help. Mama knew all the healing plants." She touched the silver locket that never left her neck. "I think she's helping me remember." For the next 2 days, Lily continued her treatment, brewing fresh batches of the herbal medicine, preparing simple broth from their stores, and keeping the cabin in surprising order for a child not yet 7. Each morning she would check their perimeter, reset the simple alarm system of bells on string that Elijah had installed, and gather fresh water from the spring. On the 4th day, Elijah's fever broke. He woke to find Lily curled asleep beside him, rabbit clutched to her chest, dark circles beneath her eyes, testifying to her vigilance. Careful not to wake her, he slowly sat up, strength gradually returning to his limbs. The cabin was tidier than he'd ever kept it. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, dishes cleaned and stacked, even the hearth swept. On the table sat a fresh bundle of medicinal plants, neatly tied with string and labeled in Lily's careful, childish hand, fever medicine. When she finally woke, her sleepy smile at finding him improved was like sunrise after longest night. "You're better," she stated, pressing a now practiced hand to his forehead. "Because of you," he acknowledged. "You saved me." Lily shrugged but couldn't hide her pride. "We're family. That's what we do." Later, as evening approached and Elijah sat in the doorway watching the sunset, a realization settled over him. In teaching Lily to survive, he had never considered that she might someday need to save him. The child he'd reluctantly taken in had become not just his responsibility, but his partner in this mountain life. Summer blossomed across the mountain in waves of green abundance. Elijah's strength returned slowly but steadily, each day bringing him closer to his former vigor. Lily hovered nearby during his recovery, her watchful eyes missing nothing, her small hands quick to assist when his faltered. The government woman had returned as promised, but found their situation much improved, Lily now reading at a level that impressed even Miss Porter. The cabin meticulously organized, and a formal application for guardianship initiated with the village magistrate's help. She departed with grudging approval, promising to return in 3 months for final assessment. On a warm afternoon, Elijah sat mending a fishing net while Lily sorted through Emma's few possessions. A task she had requested when she noticed moths threatening the fabric of her mother's shawl. Everything should be aired and checked, she explained with a seriousness that sometimes startled Elijah. So adult in such a young child. Mama would want her things kept properly, he nodded, watching as she carefully unfolded each item. The blue dress Emma had worn on special occasions, a knitted scarf, the leather satchel that had contained their few belongings when they arrived. Lily handled each with reverence, occasionally pressing a garment to her face to search for any lingering scent of her mother. "What's this?" Lily's voice broke the comfortable silence as she held up a small cloth pouch that had been sewn into the lining of the satchel, nearly invisible unless one knew to look for it. Elijah set aside his netting. "I don't know. Your mother kept some things private." With careful fingers, Lily untied the small bundle, tipping its contents onto the table. A folded paper fell out, along with something small that glinted in the afternoon light. A fragment of photograph. Yellowed at the edges, Lily unfolded the paper first, a letter written in Emma's flowing script. Elijah turned away, giving her privacy with her mother's words, but Lily's gasp drew his attention back. "Elijah, look!" She held up the photograph fragment, her hand trembling slightly. "It's the missing piece." The worn family portrait Emma had carried, the one with the partially torn face, had sat on their small shelf since her passing. Lily retrieved it now, carefully aligning the torn edge with the new fragment. The completed image showed Emma, a younger Lily, and a man whose face was now fully visible. Elijah stared at the photograph, a strange coldness spreading through his chest. The man's features, the shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw, were unsettlingly familiar. "He looks like you," Lily whispered, glancing between Elijah and the photograph. "Was he your brother?" "No," Elijah said, his throat suddenly dry. "I had no brothers." But as he studied the face, memories stirred. His grandfather speaking of a nephew who'd left the mountains, chosen city life over wilderness ways. "But my grandfather had a sister and she had a son." Lily's eyes widened. "The letter," she said, pushing the paper toward him. "Read it." Elijah hesitated, then took the letter, reading aloud the words Emma had hidden away. "My dearest Lily, if you're reading this, I've left you with Elijah Hayes, your father's cousin. I never told Daniel where we fled after I took you away from him. He was becoming dangerous in his drinking, and I feared for both of us. But should anything happen to me, I wanted you with family." Elijah may not know the connection. His grandfather and Daniel's mother were siblings, making you and Elijah second cousins. "The mountain blood runs in your veins too, which is why I knew you would thrive there, despite the hardships. Forgive me for keeping secrets, but know that every choice was made with love. Forever yours, Mama." Silence filled the cabin as the words settled around them. Elijah reread the letter, pieces falling into place. Why Emma had sought him specifically. Her certainty that he would care for Lily, the familiar determination he sometimes glimpsed in the child's expressions. "We're really family," Lily said finally, wonder in her voice. "Not just because of promises. By blood." Elijah nodded slowly, memories surfacing of his grandfather mentioning a nephew who'd married unwisely, who'd surrendered to drink after failing in city ventures. He'd been young then, the connections of distant relatives meaning little to a boy, concerned only with survival skills and mountain lessons. "Is he still alive?" Lily asked, touching the man's face in the photograph. "My father? I don't know," Elijah admitted. "I haven't heard anything of him." He hesitated, then added gently, "Your mother took you away from him for good reasons, Lily. Some men aren't meant to be fathers." She nodded, her expression solemn. "But you are." She studied the completed photograph again. "I have his chin, and your eyes, the family eyes." The simplicity of her acceptance humbled him. While he struggled to process this revelation that redefined their relationship, she had already incorporated it into her understanding of their world. "Does this change things?" Lily asked, suddenly uncertain. "That we're cousins instead of what we were?" Elijah considered her question carefully. "We're still family," he said finally. "The kind that chooses each other and the kind born of shared blood, that makes our bond stronger, not different." Lily smiled then, the worry leaving her face. She carefully placed the now complete photograph back on the shelf, positioning it so the afternoon light illuminated all three faces. "The mountain chose well," she said, echoing a phrase Elijah often used to explain the natural order of things. It brought together what belonged together. Looking at her, this child who shared his bloodline yet had come to him through such unlikely circumstances, Elijah couldn't help but agree. Some forces worked beyond human understanding, guiding lost things home. The summons arrived with the village elder, a formal letter requesting Elijah's presence at the county courthouse regarding the matter of guardianship for Lily Harmon. The date was set for the following week, giving them little time to prepare. "What does this mean?" Lily asked as Elijah read the letter aloud, her small face tight with worry. "It means we must convince a judge that you belong here," Elijah explained, trying to keep his own apprehension from his voice. With the village elder, who had stayed to ensure they understood the gravity of the situation, nodded solemnly. "This hearing will determine everything. You'll need to look respectable, speak clearly, and bring all documentation, Sissy. Emma's will, the proof of your blood relation, records of Lily's education. What if they say no?" Lily's voice trembled slightly. The elder didn't soften the truth. "Then they could place you in state care until a suitable home is found." That night, after Lily had finally fallen into troubled sleep, Elijah sat by the fire, Emma's journal open on his lap. He'd been rereading her entries about Lily, notes on her temperament, her learning style, her needs, preparing himself to speak as an informed guardian rather than a reluctant one. The journey to the county seat took most of a day. They rode in the elder's wagon, Lily wearing her best dress, freshly washed and mended, her hair neatly braided in the style Miss Porter had taught her. Elijah had traded his usual deerskin trousers for his only pair of cloth pants, and wore a clean shirt button to the collar, despite the summer heat. The courthouse stood imposing in the small city center, its stone steps and pillared entrance, unlike anything Lily had seen before. She gripped Elijah's hand tightly as he climbed the stairs, her eyes wide. "Remember," Elijah whispered, "speak truthfully about our life. Don't try to make things sound better than they are." Inside, they were directed to a wood-paneled room where Wilkins already waited alongside a severe-looking woman introduced as the state attorney. The village doctor, Miss Porter, and the elder had also made the journey to speak on their behalf. The judge, an older man with silver hair and glasses, studied the papers before him before looking directly at Elijah. "Young man, I see here you're barely 18 years old, living in a cabin without modern amenities, supporting yourself through hunting and trading. What makes you believe you're qualified to raise a child?" Elijah stood straight, meeting the judge's gaze directly. "I know the mountains, sir. How to keep safe, find food, survive winters. I've taught Lily these things while also ensuring she learns reading and numbers." He hesitated, then added, "And we're bloodkin. Her father was my cousin." The judge raised an eyebrow. "So you claim. Do you have documentation of this relationship?" The village elder stepped forward, presenting the photograph and Emma's letter. "These were discovered recently, Your Honor. They establish the family connection." Miss Wilkins spoke next, her assessment clinical but not entirely unsympathetic. "While the living conditions are primitive by modern standards, I must acknowledge improvements since my first visit. The child appears healthy, is receiving basic education, and seems attached to Mr. Hayes." Miss Porter's testimony followed, detailing Lily's rapid progress in reading and mathematics. "She's exceptionally bright, Your Honor, already reading at a third-grade level, despite starting formal instruction only months ago." Throughout the proceedings, Lily sat quietly beside Elijah, occasionally looking up at him for reassurance. When the judge finally addressed her directly, she straightened in her chair. "Lily, do you understand why we're here today?" She nodded. Yes, sir. You're deciding if I can stay with Elijah or if I have to go live with strangers. And what do you want? Lily looked at Elijah, then back to the judge. I want to stay home, on our mountain, even though life might be easier elsewhere. With electricity, running water, other children to play with, those things aren't home, Lily said simply. Elijah is home. The judge studied her for a long moment, then turned to the state attorney. Miss Caldwell, your assessment. The severe woman sighed. While I have concerns about the isolation and primitive conditions, the blood relation is significant. Additionally, the child's obvious distress at the prospect of removal must be considered. She paused. However, I would recommend continued monitoring and mandatory school attendance when she reaches appropriate age. After what seemed an eternity, the judge made his decision. Taking into account the unusual circumstances, the blood relationship, and the evident care Hayes has shown, I am granting preliminary guardianship with quarterly welfare checks for the first year. Relief washed through Elijah. So profound he barely heard the remaining conditions: that Lily must begin formal schooling by age 8, that the cabin must meet basic safety standards, that regular medical checkups were mandatory. Do you understand and accept these conditions, Mr. Hayes? The judge asked. Yes, sir, Elijah replied without hesitation. Whatever is needed. As they left the courthouse, official guardianship certificate in hand, Lily looked up at the wide sky, then back to Elijah. Can we go home now? She asked, fatigue and relief evident in her small voice. Yes, he said, the word carrying more meaning than ever before. We're going home. That night, camped on their journey back to the mountain, Lily sat beside Elijah watching the stars appear, one by one. Miss Porter says I can start school next year if I want, she said thoughtfully. Just 3 days a week in the village. Elijah nodded, still adjusting to the idea. Would you like that, being with other children? Lily considered the question seriously. Sometimes, she decided, but I still want to learn mountain things from you. Both kinds of learning are important. Her wisdom, so beyond her years, never failed to surprise him. Both kinds it will be then. Autumn painted the mountainside in brilliant hues of amber and crimson, the turning season bringing crisp mornings and early frosts. With winter approaching, Elijah's thoughts turned to preparations: wood to stack, meat to smoke, repairs to complete before snow arrived. But this year, a new concern pressed on his mind. The cabin's too small, he announced one evening as they sat by the fire, Lily practicing her letters while he repaired a snare. We need more space. Lily looked up, surprise evident in her eyes. But it's always been this size. For one person or even a temporary arrangement, yes, Elijah acknowledged. But the judge said we need proper living quarters, and you'll need your own space as you grow. The truth was more complex than he admitted. During their quarterly inspection, Miss Wilkins had noted the cabin's single room as concerning for long-term habitation by a male guardian and female child. The implication had stung, but Elijah recognized the practical concern behind it. Lily deserved privacy, a space to call her own as she matured. The next day, Elijah began surveying the area beside the cabin, measuring distances with knotted rope and marking boundaries with stakes. Lily followed curiously, watching as he sketched plans on birch bark. What will it look like? She asked, studying his rough drawings. An addition here, he pointed to the eastern wall. A separate sleeping room for you, with a proper window. Maybe a larger common area too. Lily's eyes widened. Can I help design it? Elijah handed her a piece of charcoal. Show me what you'd like. With serious concentration, Lily drew her vision. A small room with a window facing the sunrise, shelves for books and space for a larger bed. Her careful lines and thoughtful details revealed how much consideration she'd given to a room of her own, though she'd never mentioned wanting one. It's good, Elijah said, genuinely impressed. We'll use these plans. The scale of the project soon became apparent. Elijah could handle the work, but gathering sufficient logs and materials before winter would be nearly impossible alone. After days of deliberation, he made a difficult decision. "We need to ask the village for help," he told Lily as they walked down the mountain path for her weekly lessons with Miss Porter. The request didn't come easily to him. 5 years of self-imposed solitude had made community cooperation feel foreign. But when he reluctantly approached several villagers, their response surprised him. "About time you expanded that place," the blacksmith said gruffly. "My sons and I can help with the frame raising. Been too long since we had a proper building day." The shopkeeper's husband, a skilled carpenter, offered to bring his tools. "Emma was good to us when my wife was ill," he said simply. "Consider it repayment." Word spread through the small community, and by week's end, a building day had been arranged. On a clear Saturday morning, a procession of villagers made their way up the mountain path, men carrying tools and supplies, women bringing food for a communal meal. Elijah watched their approach with a mixture of gratitude and discomfort, unused to so many people invading his sanctuary. Lily, however, blossomed in the activity. She darted between groups, proudly showing her drawings, answering questions about their plans. When Miss Porter arrived with 2 older students carrying books as a housewarming gift, Lily's face glowed with pride. "This will be my library shelf," she explained earnestly, showing where her books would go in the new room. The work proceeded with surprising efficiency. Men who had built together for years fell into familiar rhythms, raising the frame by midday. Women organized an outdoor kitchen, preparing a hearty midday meal while offering suggestions on the layout. Children gathered stones for a new hearth extension. Throughout the day, Elijah worked alongside the villagers, his initial discomfort gradually easing. These people had known him as the solitary mountain ghost, yet accepted without question his transformation into Lily's guardian. Their quiet support, expressed through labor and practical advice rather than intrusive questions, touched something long dormant in him. By sunset, the addition's frame stood complete, the roof partially shingled. The interior walls would take more time, but the major structural work, the part that would have taken Elijah weeks alone, had been accomplished in a single day. As the villagers gathered their tools to depart, the elder approached Elijah. "Community takes care of its own," he said simply. "Always has on this mountain." That night, Elijah and Lily sat outside, studying the new structure silhouetted against the starry sky. Though just a frame with partial walls, it already transformed their small cabin into something more substantial, a proper home. "Will you build more rooms someday?" Lily asked, her mind clearly racing with possibilities. "Perhaps," Elijah replied, surprised to find himself considering a future beyond immediate survival. "What else should we add?" "A workshop for your carvings," she suggested immediately, "and maybe a room for guests for when Miss Porter visits in winter." The casual way she envisioned a future that included others, that extended beyond their isolated existence, gave Elijah pause. Without noticing, he had begun laying foundations, literal and figurative, for a life more connected to the world beyond their mountain. As they prepared for bed that night, Elijah unfolded Lily's drawing of her room, studying it in the firelight. Alongside practical features, the bed, shelves, window, she had drawn small details, wildflowers in a jar, the wooden figures he carved arranged on a shelf, a view of her mother's grave from the window. Not just a room, but a space that honored all parts of her life, past and present. "We'll finish it before the first heavy snow," he promised. "Your own place in our home." Lily nodded sleepily, already drifting toward dreams. "But still close enough to hear you if I call." The mountains stood silent under a blanket of fresh snow, the late autumn sunlight casting long shadows across the clearing. 1 year had passed since Emma's death, a year that had transformed both Elijah and Lily in ways neither could have imagined when fate first brought them together. Lily noticed the date first, marking it in the simple calendar they kept by the fireplace. "It's been a whole year," she said quietly over breakfast, her fingers tracing the day's number. "Since Mama went to the stars." Elijah nodded, watching her carefully. At 7, Lily had grown taller, her face losing some of its baby roundness. The silent, frightened child who had arrived on his doorstep had blossomed into a confident, thoughtful girl who split her time between mountain lessons with him and formal education in the village. Her grief, once raw and overwhelming, had mellowed into something more contemplative. "I want to do something special," she continued, "to remember her properly." Throughout the morning, they worked separately on their tributes. Elijah retreated to his small workshop, the newest addition to their expanding cabin, where he carefully selected wood for carving. Lily spread her materials across the table in the main room, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration as she worked. By midday, they were ready. Together, they climbed the gentle slope to Emma's grave, now marked with a ring of white stones and protected by a simple wooden fence Elijah had built to keep wildlife at bay. Summer wildflowers had long since faded, but Lily had carefully preserved pine boughs and late-blooming asters to place on the mound. "I made this," she said, revealing a carefully crafted booklet bound with thread. "It's stories about Mama that I remember. I wrote them down so I won't forget." Elijah thumbed through the small book, touched by Lily's neat handwriting and simple illustrations. Emma picking berries, reading stories, brushing Lily's hair before bed. Small moments of ordinary life preserved through a child's loving memory. "This is a precious gift," he said. "Your mother would be honored." Then it was his turn. From a deerskin wrapping, Elijah produced a stone marker he had carved over several days. Unlike his usual wooden crafts, this had been painstakingly chiseled from a piece of mountain granite, the letters deep and permanent. Emma Harmon, beloved mother, who entrusted her greatest treasure to the mountain. "It's beautiful," Lily whispered, running her fingers over the carved words. "Now everyone will know who rests here." Together, they placed the marker at the head of the grave, securing it firmly in the frozen ground. Lily arranged her preserved flowers, while Elijah built a small stone cairn beside the marker, a mountain tradition to guide spirits home. "Should we say words?" Lily asked, suddenly unsure of the proper ritual. Elijah, equally uncertain, nodded slowly. "Whatever feels right to say." Lily closed her eyes, her small face solemn in the winter light. "Thank you, Mama, for finding us a home, for knowing Elijah would be my family when you couldn't be here anymore. I'm learning reading and numbers like you wanted, and also how to survive on the mountain." Her voice caught slightly. "I miss you every day, but I'm not alone." When she finished, Lily looked expectantly at Elijah. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with spoken emotion, but understanding the importance of this moment. "Emma," he began hesitantly, "I've kept my promise. Lily is safe, healthy, learning. She brings light to places that were dark for too long." He paused, searching for words adequate to express the transformation her daughter had brought to his life. "Thank you for trusting me with your greatest gift. She has become mine, too." They stood in silence for several minutes, the mountain breeze whispering through the pines around them. Finally, Lily reached for his hand. "I think she heard us," she said with childlike certainty. As they walked back to the cabin, Lily recounted memories of her mother, funny stories, small kindnesses, daily rituals that had shaped her early years. Elijah listened, offering his own observations from the brief time he had known Emma, helping Lily construct a fuller picture of the woman who had connected their lives. That evening, they shared a special meal, venison stew made from Emma's recipe that Lily had found in her journal, with dried berries for dessert. As darkness fell, Elijah added extra logs to the fire, creating a warm glow throughout the cabin. "Elijah," Lily said as they sat by the hearth, "do you think Mama would be proud of us, of how we've become a family?" He considered the question seriously, as he did all of Lily's philosophical inquiries. "Yes," he said finally. "I think she would be very proud of you, how brave you've been, how much you've learned, and perhaps surprised at me." Surprised how? That the solitary mountain boy learned to be more than just a survivor. He gestured to their expanded cabin, with its separate bedrooms, proper shelving for Lily's growing book collection. and the drawings and wooden figures that decorated the walls. That he learned to build a home, not just a shelter. Lily nodded, satisfaction in her expression. "The mountain changed you," she observed with her characteristic directness. "Just like it changed me." "Perhaps we changed each other," Elijah suggested. Later, as he tucked Lily into her bed in her own room, a space now personalized with colorful quilts from the village women and shelves lined with treasured objects. She clutched his hand before he could leave. "Even though I miss Mama," she whispered. "I'm glad we found each other." "So am I, little one," Elijah replied, the words coming easily now after months of growing into his role as her guardian. "So am I." Morning light filtered through the cabin windows, catching dust motes in golden beams. 2 years had passed since Emma's desperate arrival on that stormy night, though sometimes it seemed both longer and shorter, as if time measured differently on the mountain. Elijah, now 20, stood at the stove preparing breakfast while Lily set the table with the mismatched dishes they'd collected. At 8, she moved with a quiet confidence that blended her mother's grace with the sure-footedness Elijah had taught her. Her dark hair was neatly braided, ready for the school day ahead in the village. "Will you come to the harvest festival this year?" Lily asked, placing cups beside their plates. Elijah hesitated. Though he now visited the village regularly for Lily's school, trading, and occasional community work, large gatherings still made him uncomfortable. The solitary habits of 5 years weren't easily broken. "Miss Porter says you should," Lily continued, sensing his reluctance. "She says you're part of the community now, whether you like it or not." A smile tugged at his lips. "Did she say exactly that?" "Well," Lily admitted, "she said you've earned your place and should stop hiding on the mountain so much." The assessment wasn't entirely wrong. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, their life had expanded beyond the cabin's walls. Lily now attended school 3 days each week, excelling in her studies while maintaining her mountain education. Several village children had even visited their home, initially curious about the legendary mountain ghost and his young ward, then returning because Lily was simply good company. Elijah, too, had found himself drawn into wider circles. His woodworking, once merely functional, had developed into craftsmanship sought after by villagers. He'd helped raise 2 barns, advised on hunting matters, and reluctantly accepted invitations to occasional meals with families who no longer saw him as an oddity, but as a respected, if reserved, neighbor. "I'll consider it," he conceded, serving the oatmeal he'd prepared after breakfast. They walked together down the mountain path that had once seemed so foreign, but now felt as familiar as the cabin itself. Halfway to the village, they met Jordan, the blacksmith's son, who attended the same school as Lily. The boy fell into step beside them, chattering about a fox he'd spotted on his way up. Elijah observed their easy conversation with quiet satisfaction. This too had been a journey, learning to share Lily's affections, to understand that her expanding world didn't diminish their bond, but strengthened her. At the village crossroads, Elijah knelt to Lily's level, straightening her coat against the autumn chill. "Learn well today," he said, their ritual parting words. "Hunt well," she responded with a grin, using the traditional mountain farewell, even though she knew he was headed to the carpenter's shop, not the forest. As she walked toward the schoolhouse with Jordan, her steps confident and unhurried, Elijah felt the familiar mixture of pride and wistfulness that had become part of his guardian's heart. Instead of immediately turning toward the carpenter's workshop, Elijah continued to the village square where an amateur artist had set up his easel. The arrangement had been made weeks ago, a surprise Elijah had planned carefully. "She doesn't suspect?" the artist asked as Elijah approached. "No, she thinks I'm commissioning something for the village elder." The artist nodded, gathering his materials. "I'll have it ready by week's end." "Will you want a frame?" "Yes," Elijah confirmed. "Something simple but sturdy." Later that afternoon, as they climbed back up the mountain path, Lily recounted her day, the history lesson on early settlers, the mathematics she was now teaching some of the younger children, the invitation to Jordan's home for dinner the following week. Ms. Wilkins visited the school today, she mentioned casually. She asked how we were doing. Elijah tensed slightly. Though their quarterly inspections had decreased to biannual visits, the government woman still represented potential disruption to their carefully constructed life. "What did you tell her?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "The truth," Lily said simply. "That you're teaching me to hunt with my own bow now, that we've added the new storage room to the cabin, that I'm top of my class in reading." She looked up at him, her expression serious beyond her years. "I told her I have the best of both worlds, mountain wisdom from you and book learning from school." The assessment warmed him, easing the familiar worry. Their path had never been conventional, but they had found balance between wilderness and civilization, between self-reliance and community. When they reached the mountaintop clearing where Emma's grave stood, Lily paused as she always did, placing a small stone on the cairn beside the marker. The ritual was quick now, respectful, but no longer heavy with raw grief. "Do you think she knows how well we've done?" Lily asked, a question she revisited periodically as her understanding of death evolved. "I believe she does," Elijah answered, his certainty genuine. "Some bonds transcend even the stars." The following week, the artist delivered his work, a family portrait rendered in charcoal and soft colors. Elijah and Lily stood side by side against the backdrop of their mountain, their resemblance subtly captured in the set of their eyes and the angle of their jaws. The artist had somehow conveyed both their strength and their gentleness, the dual nature of mountain people who could be both formidable and tender. When Elijah presented it to Lily, her eyes widened with delight. "It's us," she breathed, tracing the frame with reverent fingers. "Our family." They hung it in the main room where firelight would catch it in the evenings, a visual confirmation of what they had become to each other through choice, circumstance, blood, and love. That night, as they walked along the ridge to watch the sunset, a weekly tradition they maintained, regardless of weather, Lily's hand slipped naturally into his. As it had that first frightening journey to the village years ago, the mountain feels different now, she observed, her gaze traveling across the familiar peaks and valleys. "Less scary, more like it's protecting us." "Perhaps it is," Elijah said. "Or perhaps we've simply learned its language." Lily nodded, satisfied with the explanation. "Family isn't just who you're born to," she said after a thoughtful pause. "It's who you belong with." Looking at this child who had arrived in storm and sorrow, who had transformed his solitude into something rich and meaningful, Elijah could only agree. Family, like the mountain itself, wasn't defined by conventional boundaries, but by deeper truths, by who remained when storms passed, by who walked beside you on difficult paths, by who made a shelter feel truly like home.